Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Michael Zuber, one rental at a time. It is Thursday, and that means we get the one and only, the CEO of Hemlane. How you doing, Dana?
I'm great. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to the conversations today because we're going to talk about rent. This is something that obviously is very important for landlords, and there's a lot of questions. I have seen more questions about rent, specifically in episode 1, the chances of rent decline. I obviously have my 20 years of experience, which is great, but it is single market focused. You have Hemlane, which is national focused. So I thought maybe we would just talk about rent and talk about, have you seen rent decline? If you have, what were the criteria? So we'll start there. Over the last couple of years, have you seen rent declines in any of your markets? And if so, do you have kind of a story for that?
Yeah, we definitely have seen rents decline during COVID, and it was heavily market dependent. And this is where you really need to know your market. Back when at the beginning of COVID, actually, we didn't see the rents decline too much. It was about 4 to 5 months into it when suddenly tenants realized things aren't changing for the better.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were losing their jobs because their companies were shut down. If they were working in the restaurant industry, if they were working in retail stores, and they suddenly needed to move. So we definitely saw in cities, mostly the tier 1 cities. By tier 1, it was like San Francisco, New York, where we saw the rental rates decline. And it wasn't only those that were on market. It was during lease renewals where tenants were saying, I'm going to move if you keep the rent at the same amount. And so we had some extreme cases where, they were dropping them by 33% just to keep a renter in there. And it was actually emotional for a landlord because they were worried that if they didn't drop them by that 33% in these markets, that it would be on market, they would be competing against everyone else, and they would have vacancy. And so we've seen that historically. We also saw in some markets where rent went up, where folks were moving there during COVID. And, they were hot markets, especially in Texas and Florida. We definitely saw that. So would we see it again? I'd love your take on it, and then I'll let you know my opinions and thoughts.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Well, so I love the fact that so much of real estate boils down to supply and demand, including rent, including price, including all of these things, right? So we saw a hit in tier 1 cities, certainly was reported nationally. So it's obvious to me that you would likely see that as well. And again, it was kind of the cities where you had to have roommates, and it was just the quality of life just wasn't there, right? You weren't working at the restaurant or on Broadway or whatever it was. And you just you went home, right? You went somewhere else, right? Whatever you were doing, you stopped doing it, and the city life didn't work. The flip side of that, though, is that populace, or a lot of populace, moved to other areas like Florida. I just did a report on Florida this morning for inventory, right? They averaged, I think it was 27,000 active listings from 16 to 19. Today, they have less than 7,000, right? So the market's hot. You're not going to get a price decline when your average inventory is, 25% of what it was in a flat market. So it is very much supply and demand dependent. The second thing I want to say about rent is I think there's been rent increases that are unnatural the other way, right? You're talking about an emotional landlord who had a 33% rent decline to keep a tenant. We are now seeing landlords left, right, and center raising rent 33% and okay if the tenant leaves. Because again, the supply demand imbalance has gone the other way in some cities. I do not think the economy is nearly as strong. I believe we might have 4 or 5 years of flat rents in most cities. Now, there will be exceptions, Florida being one of the ones that's most obvious. But if I look nationally, heaven forbid, I look at my market of Fresno, California. It would not shock me, Dana, if rents are flat from 2022 to 2027. And I've seen it before, right? I've seen rents be flat for 4 or 5 years before over my 22 years now. So I just don't, I can't see rent going up 20% and then 20%. People can't afford it. They eventually push back. And I saw an article in Bloomberg this morning that New York tenants are finally pushing back. They're like, no, we're leaving. Right.
Yeah.
We're kind of going back. So I have seen rent go down. In my market, I've not seen rents go down. Let me be clear. In 22 years, rents haven't gone down. I've had to do move-in specials, but that was very '06 specific because everybody was buying homes. But that was a very short 9, maybe 12-month window. I do not see rents going down nationally, but I certainly hope they go flat. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I think a lot of it will have to do with, if you think of inflation, right? If we just kind of break down inflation, there are a couple of things at play. So one is, inflation is increasing, or we've reported 8% plus, right? Past couple of months, we believe it's higher than that, or at least I do. But then, so there's 2 points there that kind of contradict one another. One is, okay, well, there's inflation, and we have seen, nationwide salaries increase, not by as much, but it's like 4 to 5%. So shouldn't we also be increasing rents because the cost of goods is more? And we are seeing salaries increase. On the flip side, they're not increasing by as much. And so tenants are more cost burdened. So what they used to could afford in rent, they can no longer afford. So I don't know what your thoughts are from that perspective, but I do agree with you that tenants have more choice now to say, you know what, I don't really need to live here, because COVID has made it where you hear of a lot more transition out of where people have been traditionally living, and they can do that much more easily. And the job market has been hot, and so they could go and just say, you know what, if you're going to continue to raise rent. So I do think tenants have a bit more power there. But tenants who don't want to move, who are in really hot markets, they might continue to see that rent increase. But I think, overall, we're not going to see the rent increases that we've seen in Boise and all these other areas over the past couple of years.
Yeah. So I think, first and foremost, I think what you're pointing out exactly what I see coming is tenants are cost burdened everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Inflation's up 10%, maybe 12, maybe 15, wages up 5. That's not a good equation. The money's got to come out of somewhere, right? We're already living paycheck to paycheck. We already can't handle a $500 emergency. At some point, even if the tenant wants to stay, they can't, right? I've been doing this long enough, family experience, right? Landlords, you don't want to hear this. Rent is not the number one thing for most families.
Yeah.
Food comes first, right? Car for many of them is next, right? Rent's not first. So they will make sacrifices. They will get roommates. They will down select. They will move farther away. And in today's telecommuting and all these other, that's what we're seeing. So the last thing I'll talk about a rent decrease is there's actually some kind of counter currents going on, right? Portland, Oregon, I think is one, and LA County is another, where they're still being punitive on landlords. And we've already seen early data out of Portland with 4,000 less single family rentals. I believe LA County is going to dwarf that once the numbers are counted in a year or two. But you are seeing landlords just say enough is enough. And what that means, because they are the owner of the property, they can remove the tenant. Even in California, they likely have to give a 90-day notice or 60-day notice, whatever it is, to vacate, because they're going to remodel. And then they're going to sell the property to an owner occupant.
Yeah.
So I believe there's a lot of cities that have taken very short-sighted moves, a la LA County and Portland, that will become very cost burden later. When you lose 10% of your rental stock, that doesn't mean that only means prices are going up. So a lot of cities are making very short-sighted decisions, which will only make rents go up more. So yeah, I don't see the chances of rents declines being nationally. I certainly hope rents are flat. That would be okay, at least for the next couple of years. Any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would say in these markets where they are restricted to increase rent, we're seeing that where if you look in Hemlane, the properties that go off of Hemlane, we ask why. And the number one reason, and it's just, it's like 75% is I am selling this rental property.
Exactly.
It is not because they have decided, to collect rent offline or anything like that. It's because they are selling the property. And in a market like you have today, where home prices are still high, right? And we can make the argument of whether or not they're slow, but right now they're at a high. And when you see increase in all these regulations, more tenant landlord law that is restrictive, landlords have that power to say, I'm done with it. I'm just going to sell it and get the cash out and figure out what other options that I have out there. And so I do think regulations play a really, really major role in that. And who loses? It's the tenant in the end.
Oh, without question. And it is so predictable as to almost be a series of dominoes. Well, okay, if you want to do that, then this happens and this happens. And it's just, there is a lag effect. So do me a favor. Where can people find Hemlane? Because they need to take advantage of your amazing 30-day trial.
Yeah, if you're looking for property management, you have a rental property and you want to learn more, Hemlane provides property management for you, both leasing. So if you're looking for a tenant, as well as the day-to-day management, you go to Hemlane, www.hemlane.com.
Thank you very much, Dana.